Hello, my name is Maria Economou, as you heard, and Economou for whether in Greek. I'm lecturing museum studies at the University of Glasgow, a joint post shared between the Hunterian Museum and the Humanities Advanced Technology and Information Institute, but also with my other Greek hat. I was based at the Department of Cultural Technology and Communications, so you'll have another talk by my colleagues here on another side of cultural technology. I think my current position, this hybrid, being jointly funded between a university museum and the university department doing research in cultural technology, is quite a common thread since we're talking about skills and training today. It's one of the changing functions of where the technology and also the other socio-economic changes are happening. There are and there will be more and more of this sort of joining in between sort of positions and roles. For example, with my Hunterian hat, I'm responsible for designing the digital strategy of the museum, but also at HATII we're doing research apart from teaching in museum studies and other master's programs that have to do with the use of technology in the cultural sector. We also deal with different kinds of research projects and collaborate with others, as well as in postgraduate and undergraduate teaching that have to do with questions like this. So it's very interesting to see the debate about how to best train in this kind of developing a new situation. The Hunterian is one of the oldest museums in Scotland. It has a very diverse collection. I just put a snapshot from beetles to ethnographic materials to coins, architectural paintings. But because we don't have much time, I just wanted to focus today a little bit on how all this changing world is affecting the way different kind of professionals practice, but also are trained to work in this field. So, and you have to excuse me, I was playing around with the different colors, but the main message here is that none of this is more important, but all of these things affect everything that we do in this field. So all this movement, the last more than a few years, it's a few decades now, the museum becoming more democratic and moving away from this more traditional approach of the Temple of the Muses and the Center of Knowledge, and also becoming more transparent, more clear in terms of the text and the way it's written, in terms of its actions, of saying what we're trying to do and how and why, trying to become, all of these are aspirations. I'm not claiming all the museums necessarily achieve them, but at least it's the wider trend and the pressures that more and more of them feel about today. The move to get outside the physical buildings and become more accessible, all of these things, I won't say specific examples, but you can see how the technology has had a role to play with greater accessibility through the web, for example. The getting out of the physical building, the digital is one of the best tools to allow you to do this in multiple ways. The moving away from the Temple of Knowledge, that's debatable, I think, because the technology in theory is trying to do this. Sometimes I find very advanced, highly and very nicely designed technological tools are extremely conservative in terms of the underlying kind of knowledge and communication paradigm. So forgive more colors here, and they're not a linear circle. It's yet more changes, I think, that affect the use of the digital. All this co-curation has started, we're all becoming tired of the use of the word, but actually I think, despite the terminology, it's very interesting developments. And I think the key message here is more and more cultural institutions, not just museums, are starting, or at least are starting to experiment, are moving towards working more with different kind of audiences and communities and groups. Following from what I was saying before, trying different types of models of communication. So creating or curating existing material, or creating new materials and bringing them back in the collections, asking the user's opinion about what should be part of the collections or not, asking them to create together with artists, curators, different kind of mediators and agents that work in that role, but also moving into the personal sphere and realm. All of you probably in this room, I won't even do raise your hand, have a mobile phone, and there's a lot by now, mobile apps that have cultural content coming from cultural institutions, and chances are some of you, most of you probably will have used some of them, maybe in your toilet, at home or somewhere, and not necessarily inside the museum in front of an artwork. So this change that the technology has made stronger, the blurring of the boundaries and of the location of where we're experiencing this, is also affecting things a lot. they still are memory institutions, supposed to be one of the key institutions that our society until now has to share memories, create memories, and what's supposed to be encouraging this communal spirit of what should be in a museum, an archive, or a library. But the way this is happening has been changing drastically, as you see here. Okay, this was a bit of the socioeconomic background and the ideological of how things are moving and changing. How all that kind of framework I explained very briefly affects the training of professional skills that's supposed to be the topic of the day today and the focus of the project. This combination, I think, and here is just some of my thoughts. There are no answers. That should have with question marks. It's issues for us to discuss or think about. I think the combination and the balance between curatorial expertise, and I mentioned curatorial in the wider possible sense. I mean here educational skills as well, understanding of the museum context, if we put it a little bit more broadly, deep understanding of the museum, or put here better cultural rather than just museum context. The combination with technical skills and finding the right balance between the two, I think it's one of the key things. It should be easy. It's not as easy as it sounds always. Understanding the learning power of the objects, and I mean here again in the widest possible sense. Object could be a piece of music or intangible heritage here as well. The physical encounter as well with material culture. It's very important to maintain this, as well as the next one though, managing to keep up with the mad pace that the technology is changing and shifting. And that brings us to the next one. It's also the market forces related to technology that try to convince us we definitely need the most expensive latest piece of software or kit, and we need to keep investing in this at very hard times in terms of sustainability. So managing, and I think our chair said in his talk about the mission at the bottom of his diagram, I think this is a very important message for anybody working in this field. They need to understand what that is, understand the context and what's the mission, and putting it first, while afterwards trying to see what's the type of technology that would help to do this better. So I don't think it's about people that need to be trained well in this field should not just understand the technology, its limitations and abilities and possibilities, but also about people and collections and how these three things work well together. And also they should not be afraid to be very critical. The virtual is not always the answer. Sometimes they're wonderful, much cheaper, better, more creative solutions that are very low tech in many cases. So it shouldn't be seen as a tool in itself. To do all that, I think this crazy person trying to juggle everything that I mentioned, you understand even the most wonderful postgraduate degree, undergraduate, CPD, whatever you name it, will not do all of these things. For all of us, this is where, as the previous speaker said, he's here to learn. This is a learning experience, for example. We should, I think, accept for all of us it's a lifelong, not a long life, but a lifelong process. So I think it's very important. I'm not looking at the project here. The eCultSkills looked much more specifically about ways to map profiles and how to do it. My wider message is that it should be a continuous development process, and that in that process the peer group is very important. We should learn to do better. In Greece we're not always great at this, learning from each other and working in groups rather than individually. But also learning from others, not just our peers, learning from our visitors, learning from the different communities, from different learning from school children, for example. There's all kinds of different learning opportunities. It's very important throughout all this to combine the theory with practice. None of the two extremes would work with something as complex like this. And I just put something about visits, comments, and exchanges as some of the small ways we can try to immerse ourselves maybe in different case studies, different missions, different approaches to try to learn a bit more from them. These are some examples from the postgraduate different courses we had in different training sessions that are quite hands-on. On purpose, they're very low-tech, but I think you need to start with real objects before you start thinking of using the technology to interpret this creatively. And just very quickly, because I don't have much time, one of the projects we are running at the Hunterian, remember the context and what I was saying about the mission, we are a university museum, so primary audience is students and staff of the university without excluding other communities there as well. So for example, the museum university student educators is a very simple idea. A lot of other university museums, especially in the States, have started doing it. but one that works really well. It's a voluntary, non-paid, but training opportunity as a student to also be a guide. So it's a win-win situation for training to work. It needs to be win-win. The students are gaining skills. They're communicating with different groups. The visitors are getting a human person, a being that's very well trained in the collection. The museum is getting a group of young, talented, and enthusiastic educators, and also for a different level, the Hunterian Associates program is for PhD and more serious, in-depth type of study, where they apply for it, and if they get the position, they have their research, they have to show some kind of link with the collections. While the last one is a research project I'm coordinator of. It's a network, a research network I started in Scotland on the evaluation of digital resources, which is an example of not just higher education researchers, but also cultural professionals from archives, libraries, and museums. And you're welcome to join us and join the conversation online, because we're doing different workshops and different events on this. An example of how we can go on having this opportunity of learning from each other, combining theory and practice, and not just higher education, but also using the cultural heritage sector. And I'll finish off a little bit by raising these issues, that when we're talking about training in ICT for cultural professionals, I think we need to have, as I highlighted, I hope, different levels and different models. I don't think there's a perfect, unique solution that works for everybody. So maybe using the learning outcomes might be one of the ways to give you the flexibility to decide different ways about how you do achieve these learning outcomes. But at the same time, that's why I think projects like the eCult are important. You do need some clear guidelines and some consensus and strategy, Europe-wide, if not nationally, and if not internationally, ideally, about how all these different flexible pieces of the puzzle fit together, so people can move in from different jobs, different countries, and be able to carry the skills with them. But this needs, that's why a little bit the explanation of the three little people trying to do different things about learning styles. All of this needs to acknowledge we're all different and we learn in different ways. So it should be different types of contexts to try out the kind of training. Quality is very important. Always it's important when we talk about training. But in the cultural sector, I think it's 10 times even more. But it's also very important, I think in Greece we need to hear this. It's not just about the paper chase, getting yet another certificate. For example, we will all get our piece of paper from attending today, but is this what's the important thing from today? It's much more important to motivate and empower learners, I think, personally. And I think also when we're talking about technologies, of course, doing training remotely is something that should definitely be expanded and more done on it. But I'm a firm believer that face-to-face is also extremely valuable. So it's very important, I think, for this training sessions to combine both where possible. And all of this that I mentioned, of course, raises wider strategic issues, I think, for organizations. It's very important to think about it, that digital is becoming in the center of the organization, not just a little side IT department that does their things and we get on with life. We cannot afford to do this, whether it's academia or in the cultural sector. It should be, it's becoming in the center anyway. It's important, though, to align your strategy and have people higher up have a buy-in in all these projects. And with all of this, by definition, there's an awful lot of change, and individuals and organizations need to learn to adapt to that. So I'll finish here. Thank you very much.